Mani was the founder of Manichaeism in the middle of the 3rd century CE, which was first developed and propagated in the Iranian world, and his new doctrine developed into one of the most widely spread religions in the world at the time. Mani himself was the first person associated with his doctrine to come into close contact with Buddhism, but not the last. The assimilation of Buddhist practices and concepts by the Manichaean communities of Eastern Iran and Central Asia brought Buddhism and Manichaeism closer to Iran and Iranian culture in different intervals. The Manichaeans experienced at least 2 major exoduses in the course of their history: a move eastward to Central Asia, Turkestan, and China in response to Sassanid persecution at the end of the 3rd century, and a move westward toward North Africa and southern Europe during the advent of the Islamic Empire and its progressive expansion. The first migration during the Sassanid time to the east brought the Manichaeans into contact with the Buddhists in the Central Asian and Chinese regions, and strongly influenced Manichaean beliefs and practices. In this chapter we will explore the emerging correlation between Manichaeism and Buddhism, as well as Buddhist influences on Manichaeism and the subsequent influence that Manichaeism exerted in introducing certain elements of Buddhism to Iran. The Buddhist connection will be contextualized with regard to both the founder Mani himself as well as the Manichaean communities of Central Asia. The focus of this discussion thus is not on the nature of Manichaeism as a religion in its own right, but rather on its intersections with Buddhism and its role as intermediary in bringing what it borrowed from Buddhism to Iran. Mani was an innovative prophet who lived in the 3rd century. He was born in the part of Mesopotamia known as Babel, or Babylonia, in present-day southern Iraq. His native tongue was Eastern Aramaic, but he also possessed a sound knowledge of Middle Persian and Coptic. Mani's mother, or Mariam, was apparently from an aristocratic Parthian family, although Mani's aristocratic genealogy may have been post-constructed in imitation of the Buddha's princely family background. In any case, both of these spiritual masters, Buddha and Mani, were depicted as having renounced a luxurious life in favor of an ascetic path. Mani's father, Patak, was originally from the city of Ecbatana in western Iran. A spiritual man, Patak is said to have frequently visited a temple, or more specifically an idol temple, in the city of Ctesiphon, not far from present-day Baghdad. During one of his visits to this temple, he heard a voice that commanded him repeatedly to abstain from meat, wine, and marriage. The circumstances of this episode are significant since the city of Ctesiphon was the capital of the Parthian and later the Sassanid dynasties, and in Mesopotamia during this period, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Gnosticism, 3 religions not widely known for having idol temples, were all widespread. This seems to indicate that the temple that Mani's father frequented and where he heard a command to abstain was, if not a Babylonian Gnostic pagan temple, a Buddhist site. It is rather interesting to speculate on whether Mani's father, from the generation of the religiously tolerant Parthian dynasty, had Buddhist inclinations and influenced his young son. This question cannot be answered with any certainty. Mani grew up under his father's spiritual teachings and in a rich cultural environment within the multi-ethnic and multi-confessional community of Mesopotamia. Mani declared himself the founder of a new religion and began his preaching and writing in Mesopotamia, making contact with the Sassanid king Shapur, to whom he later dedicated his book Shapur-Ragan, written in Middle Persian. Later in his quest, he traveled to India, where he preached and studied for over a year. Various scholars argue that before Mani went to India he had already formulated the seeds of his new religion based on Christian Gnosticism and the dualist conceptions of the ancient Iranian religions of Zoroastrianism and Zoroastrianism. It is conceivable that he added Buddhist elements to his doctrine only after his trip to India. However, let us briefly consider the roots of Mani's Gnostic and dualist doctrine before we consider the circumstances under which Buddhism was incorporated into his doctrine in its final form. Mani under dualist influences. Mani was familiar with Zoroastrianism, Zoroastrianism, and Mithraism from his original cultural roots. Seemingly, he derived his dualism from Zoroastrianism, a pre-Zoroastrian religion predicated upon an early concept of the dualism of the cosmos, in which Zervan was the primary god and father of the god brothers, Ormuzd and Ahriman, primal twins representing the principles of good and evil, respectively. Despite their indebtedness to Zoroastrianism, Manichaeans later became critical of Zoroastrianism from the standpoint of their own refined conception of dualism. Mani posed a threat by competing with Zoroaster's teachings, and the Zoroastrian elites responded harshly. They eventually destroyed all the Manichaean literature and challenged Manichaeism in the centuries that followed. The Zoroastrian influence on Mani is nevertheless apparent in his Shiparagon, where Mani equates the Zoroastrian god of Mirror, Mithra, with the sun in the struggle against the demon gods.